My name is Molly Boatman. I am a grad student at Morningside College, and I teach math at North High. The title of my study is Testing the Effects of RAM, a Study Method in a High School Inclusion Classroom. The problem that is addressed throughout this study is that math achievement scores are low. The math achievement scores are low because students do not know how to study, nor do they know how to take notes. And this is happening because teachers do not teach students proper study skills or note-taking skills while they're in school, specifically high school. I chose this topic because achievement scores is something that's discussed in my district often, and a matrix, which is part of the RAM study method, is a study tool that has never been used in a math classroom. So I wanted to see the effect that it would have on our achievement scores. Some past teacher interventions. There's two, the direct instruction and small group instruction. Direct instruction is a whole class instruction. The teacher is at the front of the classroom. It's like a lecture. Teacher teaches the new task, students demonstrate it, and then students practice it individually. For the small group instruction, it's similar to the direct instruction, but students are in small groups. So teacher is not instructing 25 students at a time. Now maybe they're instructing 5 to 7 at a time. And this is seen as the ideal setting to improve interactions with students because the numbers are so small. However, students are still underperforming because these two intervention pieces are not teaching them the study skills that they need. Some past research that has worked. These are two note-taking strategies. Is the SQ3R. During the SQ3R, students survey the text. They create questions about the text. They then read the text. They answer the questions that they wrote after they read the text, and then they review it all by recalling from memory. And recall is part of RAM as well. And using recall is an effective study strategy. KWL chart is what I know, what I want to know, and what I have learned. And a study was done that proved that a KWL chart raised math achievement scores. So the RAM study strategy is record and review, associate, and then metacognition, RAM. RAM uses a matrix, and it's been proven that a matrix develops higher achievement scores than an outline or a text. Some theories that back this method is information processing, the 3 types of memory, and then the metacognition itself, which is part of the M on the RAM. Information processing, just that theory says that a human mind is like a computer. So you input, you store, and then you output. So that could be such as writing notes, storing it, looking at it, studying at it, and then output would be producing it onto the task for the day or even onto the test. The types of memory: sensory, working, and long-term memory. Sensory is the gathering of information or the input. Working is cognitive or the storing and using. And then long-term memory. Long-term memory and how much is in your long-term memory is based off of how well the information is organized, which is essentially a matrix. A matrix is an organized piece of study material that students can use. So that brings us to metacognition, which is a theory by Flavel, and it's the understanding of one's capability, of how they learn, how they react to peers. It's just being aware of oneself. The effects of using the RAM study is basically the purpose of this whole study. So how it affects the math assessments that students were given. A study like this has never been done before. A matrix in a math classroom, nobody's done it. My independent variables is the RAM study method, which is being used by my experimental group, and then a student choice for a study method is was being used by my control group. The dependent variable was the assessment scores. My participant for my study, they were all freshmen. I had two different courses. I had an Algebra 1 course and then an Algebra 1A course. Algebra 1 is just your typical Algebra 1 course. Algebra 1A is a slower paced algebra course, so it's Algebra 1 chunked into 2 years. Excuse me. So I had 50 students in my Algebra 1 class, and then I had 79 in my Algebra 1A class. When I combined those two numbers, 76 of those students were males and 53 of them were female. And then breaking that down even more, I have had 26 students that were on individualized education plans or IEPs. I work in a very diverse school, and my classroom will say that as well. I have 40% of my students were Caucasian, 42% Hispanic, 9% African American, 6% Asian American, and 3% Native American. The materials that I used during this study, excuse me, were the assessments. I had a district assessment that is district produced, and then a unit assessment, which is teacher produced. And that was taken on paper and laptop. My Algebra 1 students take a portion of their unit test on the laptop. Every student in the district has a laptop. We're a one-to-one district. We follow the Common Core curriculum, which is followed closely throughout the whole state. So every algebra student is learning the same material. My Algebra 1A students, their unit was over writing equations in slope-intercept form, and my Algebra 1 students were learning methods for solving quadratic equations. My procedure, students were given the matrix on day 1 in both classes. They were told to take it, study it every day, look at it, just to get that the memorization of it happening. They also took notes, and they were scored on a 0 to 3 scale. If they scored 9 points or 333, they got an incentive on the experimental group side only. The control group was told nothing about this. And then students also wrote questions based off of the different methods. So my Algebra 1A students wrote questions on how to write equations from slope-intercept form, and Algebra 1 wrote the questions on a different method of how to solve quadratic equations. And then those questions were also scored on 0 to 2, and they were used as their review. And then after that's done, we took the district and unit assessments. For my Algebra 1A results is listed here. I had an increase on the experimental group on the district post-test. Not a huge increase, not what I wanted to see. I wish they would have increased more, because unfortunately the control group had a greater increase than they did. And then on the unit assessment, they did have a higher increase, but the mean was very similar at a 95 and then a mean of a 93. So again, it's not any huge gains. However, when I was looking at their notes, the Algebra 1A students had 4 different sessions of notes, and as the notes kept going, they were getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So the experimental group, they didn't score below a 2.0 on notes 2, 3, and 4. They actually got a 2.2, a 2.6, and a 2.3. So they were growing and growing and growing, and my control group never scored above a 2.0. So that's huge for the notes. What I got from that was that as the students were taking the notes, they were getting better and better and better at that. And this also was the case for the questions. Um, as the unit went on, they were getting better and better of writing those questions. This is a table of the unit post-test data, the mean, the standard deviation, the t-test is all on that. My Algebra 1 students, we had an increase on the district post-test. It was a 10% increase versus a 7% increase that the control group had. But again, it was kind of like the unit post-test for Algebra 1A. The mean scores were just too similar for it to say, yes, this worked. So I couldn't say that for this case. For the unit assessment, unfortunately, the means decreased, which is not what we wanted to see at all. I did write those means down. The experimental group did have a higher mean, but since it decreased from the pre-test to the post-test, we can't really say that, yes, this did work. Like the Algebra 1 students, the experimental group also improved on the notes, specifically new notes 2 and 6. Their mean for those were a 1.8 and a 2.2, and the control group on the same notes was a 0.6 and a 1.7. So the experimental group was growing as it was going on, and the control group had some growth, but nothing above a 2.0. Here is a chart of the unit pre-test and post-test. Unfortunately, we did have a decrease, but not a huge decrease, but it is shown here. Limitations. For limitations, the timing. I did this at the end of the school year, and a lot of my students' attendance was down. They were just mentally checked out, didn't try. So I wish that I would have done it at the beginning of the school year to kind of get them on this routine of what was happening. The second one is I gave them teacher-provided materials. Students get better recall when they produce it. So if I were to do this again or for any future research, I would start this at the beginning of the school year and implement it then so the students are used to this process. And then eventually, instead of me giving them the materials, they would eventually create the materials themselves. I had some limited data since I only had 2 tests to base this off of our 1 unit. I was relying on that unit to see if we had any academic achievement or not. In reality, again, at the beginning of the school year, I would be able to tell if we had growth because I would have more units. And then another limitation is technology. Not all schools have the technology, like the one-to-one laptop like we do, but there is the option to have all the tests on paper. An implication, since there was growth on the notes and the questions, I would say that teachers should integrate note-taking and student-created questions to strengthen students' note-taking skills. That can only help them in the future. Since these students were just freshmen, I'm hoping that they'll hang on to these note-taking skills that they developed and use them throughout their high school career into their college career as well. And these are the references that I used throughout my presentation.